Yeah, so I was a double major in French and German literature and a minor in sociology. Very close to a minor in business, but I didn't finish with that. In terms of like my classes, this is before COVID, so they were almost all in person. Because of the fact that it's foreign languages, they're pretty small classes. I mean, especially once I got to 300 levels, 3000s now, I guess, it was, max 12, 13 people in a class. So I only had one or two, maybe 40, 50 person classes. I spent a year studying abroad, so it was a little bit different. And then I was involved in like some student orgs, club sports, things like that. So I was pretty involved on campus and on quite a bit. And I typically took 24 credits a semester. That was kind of my experience as a commuter for like the last 2 years, and I lived on campus at the beginning. So I kind of had a bit of multiple experiences, like types of classes and things like that. So because I have ADHD, it was really something that had a lot to do with like interest in the content. I think ADHD is a bad designation for the disorder itself. It's more of an issue with attention regulation. So that's why people can have hyperfocus. So if it was something I was really interested in, I had no real problems when I was like in it. But oftentimes if there was a topic or the way the professor presented the topic, if I just didn't resonate with me, there was a 0% chance I was paying attention to anything that was going on. And then I said that was one of the big issues, is that lack of connection, especially in like my bigger classes where the professor just kind of had a more generalized approach just based on the nature of the courses. And so those classes were almost like, I mean, I showed up because attendance was required, but I didn't really mentally show up a lot of times. And then I'd say the other main challenges were like deadlines and timing. Sometimes they didn't kind of respect the difficulties of getting things done in time, especially if they were short deadlines for things like small assignments, where it was just felt very tedious, or you had a day or two to kind of respond based on something that happened in class, and it was which makes sense pedagogically to some degree to want to have students engage, but it can oftentimes lead me to just either doing terrible work or struggling to do the work itself, and so it didn't really resonate with me. And on the flip side, when some assignment took too long, it was really difficult to like manage my time and get things done in time, because it was so, for 3-month capstone or something like that, it was just so vast that it really required a lot of self-discipline, which is difficult on a timeline, like time management section. In terms of overcoming them, I mean, you just get better at it as you become a better student. I also was lucky that for the most part, I had access to meds the whole time, which always makes a huge difference, especially in situations where you're not in control. Like in a classroom where you're at the whim, if you will, of the professor. I think also like making friends, holding each other accountable, having other reasons to show up to class. So when I was able to, like in my major, get to know my classmates and be friends with them, it gave you another reason to want to engage in class, which really helped. So offering different pathways into like doing that sort of thing. And when I had professors who gave me the freedom to kind of write about what interested me roughly in the topic, it allowed me to use my interest as kind of an interlocutor that allowed me to kind of maintain like a bit more like I met the deadlines because I was interested in doing the thing, as opposed to like because they were deadlines per se. It was more of that. So the professors that gave me the freedom, which I know can be challenging for some people, for me that was really freeing when I had to write like a 10-page essay or 15-page essay, especially in German or French. I had the ability to like, this was something that interested me, so I'm going to write about it. Really helped as well. I remember I took like the honors college class, and there was one time where you had to walk around campus, or we were like doing spray painting things for part of a project, and it felt very engaging and stimulating in a sensorial way, which I think is really big for ADHD specifically, that like when you're unstimulated, you look everywhere but the thing in front of you. So having that diversity of stimuli, again, like kind of sticking your teeth into, I think in general group activities are a good way of doing that, because it just gives you kind of that social element to it. And again, I was taking languages, so it's kind of works, you're meant to talk with your neighbor about, how was your day and what's the weather and these sort of things. So it really helped when I could do that. Or if it was a small enough class, the professor led the class, there's only 5, 6, 7 of you, you're going to respond a lot, and it's hard to really hide. So even if it was a more lecture based, it still felt very like eye contact compelling. But like I remember I took a class that was like an econ 101 or one of those like micro, and I think I just chalked to the people next to me the entire time and never really paid attention in class, because it lacked that like component of kind of seeing your teeth into. So I'd say those sort of things in various forms in some capacity were really what made it like good. And the important thing was they were in class. Having the same thing but doing it on my own or at home meant more challenges, meeting up with people. You're in a library, or the OC, whereas in class you're kind of in that microcosm of space. You can really focus your brain in it better than if it's like a take-home assignment. Like grades, for example, like were actually not a matter for me at all. And in fact, I kind of stopped caring about grades, in part because I always got good grades, and so I was just confident. And weirdly enough, I started getting even better grades as I progressed along, and when I stopped caring less, because it just, again, like I was like, I am interested in learning this and exploring this thing, and that's something I do now in my work and stuff too. Is like finding that balance of like, if I want to do it, I will do it. And that's something I think with people with ADHD, especially, and maybe other similar neurodiversities, it's like, it's really hard to do things you don't want to do. And so professors making sure they have that, whatever it is, whether it's a social motivation or something like that, but like grades and goals were just like threats, which would motivate me in a way, but I don't think that like threats are like, not actual threats, but you know what I mean, like kind of psychological, social threats are not, especially in OU, it's like an economic threat if you don't pass the class. Those were motivators, but not, I would, it's like dirty energy. For example, decorum in the class, which is kind of what I answered for that the last one a bit, like the expectations of decorum are very neurotypical, from that I should be able to, like, if you call on me, I should know what's happening. I should be able to follow along, or these. So a lot of those rules, they can be helpful guides, but not if they're not developed inclusively themselves. If they're just like, even if it's best practice, it's only best practice in a generalized sense, each individual class. And there are some, someone with, let's say, I don't know, a Tourette's or something like that, who, speaks out in class, is like letting them do that thing can harm me, because then I'm struggling to pay attention. So like being inclusive to one neurodivergent person can be the opposite. And that's where like having that discourse and then setting up those rules, I think, could be helpful. But just making rules arbitrarily without student input, it fails to take into consideration that a disorder is a spectrum usually, and is not the same experienced or symptomatic for each person. But especially when it comes to someone with neurologically atypical, they might not even tell you for two reasons. One, they might not know, or they haven't gotten diagnosed yet, which of course can create hurdles on like bureaucratic levels, because they can't give you, or the university, files that don't exist. Which I've experienced as a teacher, where someone like we know had a neurologically atypical thing, but the parents refused to give them the documentation, and then you have an issue thing. So that getting to know your students and understanding them, their needs, catering your class, not to one student, but to that kind of, can you find ways where different students can maybe go through an assignment a bit differently, but cater to their needs. And then the last one I'd say is that with a lot of these things, and society in general, like there's 10% of us are left-handed for a reason. It makes sense. The world is a better place when and your classrooms are actually more rich and interesting and elucidating and powerful when you take into consideration the different needs of people and allow them to shine, because you're allowing different perspectives on like what it means to be human, to exist in your space. So like, it's not a deficit, it's an asset. It just has to be understood for what it can be, rather than what it isn't, I guess.